Welcome back, everybody, to Align, Engage, Fulfilled. I'm your host, Clarence Moore, and all season, we've been examining engagement from every angle: the systems that support it, the leadership behaviors that create it, the organization forces that destroy it. And what I keep coming back to, what my philosophy and my methodology are fundamentally built on, is that engagement doesn't start with a policy or a program or a reward. It starts with alignment, and alignment starts with purpose. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I've talked about this all throughout the season, self actualization sits at the top of that pyramid. It's the fullest expression of who you are and what you're here to do. In the Moore method, my methodology, I translate that into the workplace as fulfillment. But before we get there, you have to first be aligned. And it's the concept that we explored all throughout the first season. Alignment at its core is about knowing your purpose and then building everything around it. My guest today built a company from the ground up on exactly that premise, not as a mission statement, not as a marketing tagline, but as a lived operational reality that really shaped how she hired, how she led, how she navigated a pandemic, and how she fought to get her company back when it was essentially taken from her. Jodi Scott is the co-founder and CEO of Green Goo, a plant-based first aid and herbal wellness company rooted in the belief that nature offers powerful, practical solutions for everyday healing. She grew her business to over 120,000 retail locations, earned B Corp certification, and built the kind of culture that most organizations only claim to have. She's an EY Entrepreneur of the Year finalist, a certified herbalist and permaculturist, and she holds a master's degree in health psychology. Now, with that impressive background, Jodi brings a systems thinking approach to leadership, culture, and organizational design. But none of those credentials are why I wanted her on the show. I wanted her because she built something real, essentially had it taken from her, and she chose to fight to get it back. And in doing so, she answered a question that I think every leader needs to sit with. What are you actually willing to protect to stay deeply aligned with your mission and engaged in your purpose? Jodi, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you today.
Oh, it's so good to be here with you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so before we get started and really get into the conversation, tell us a little bit about Green Goo and what you do.
So, Green Goo is plant-based first aid, and it was really born from my mom, sister, and I's passion to reinvent the first aid space. We found that the natural consumer was willing to abandon their natural ethos because they were told these one-time use chemicals were the only way to get the job done. And then upon further investigation, we recognized that the OTC space was really born for acute skin conditions, meaning a cut, a scrape, poison ivy, cold sore, and chronic skin conditions are at an all-time high. So
Mm,
we wanted to prove that plant-based could be first superior in efficacy and, oh, by the way, also natural. And so that's where Green Goo was born.
lovely. And how did you end up with building this business? What was it about the idea behind Green Goo? Obviously, your background is in herbal, as an herbalist and permaculture. How did you get to the point of building the idea of what Green Goo is now?
Well, having a master's in health psychology, being pre med, I was training resident physicians on the biopsychosocial model and specializing in psychoneuroimmunology. What does that mean in practice? Is that I wanted to advance the healthcare engagement in terms of
Mm,
rather than simply prescribing, let's get more data points and provide a more holistic intervention. Perhaps there's something you can help with their lifestyle or connect them with a resource outside of the simple prescription. And
Yeah.
psychoneuroimmunology very much sounds like what it is in terms of the mind, the nervous system, and the immune system, and how it's all interconnected. And at the time, it was very hypothetical. Someone's stressed, that's interesting. They get sicker, but they didn't have the case studies behind it to really support that intersystem connective tissue, if
Mm.
you will. And for me, it was very much a personal moment. I was pregnant and I went into my first aid cabinet. I got a cut, and that's why I went there. And I was like living a very clean life, incredibly cognizant of ingredients. And yet I had made the exception in my first aid cabinet. So when I opened it up and decided to refresh my memory on the ingredients, I was I was like, "Wow, why am I doing this?" And
Mm.
so for me, it was that personal moment, and then I went and sort of tested that. Am I alone? And my sister's an absolute purist, and she was like, "Yeah, my husband's an EMT. I use it too." And so very quickly, we started collecting the data to identify that this was a space that really had only been born in the last 100 years and was a product of the Industrial Revolution. A lot of the ingredients in our over the counter first aid category are man made chemicals that were just recently introduced through this Industrial Revolution, where we are for the first time creating consumer packaged goods that could then be distributed in a mass way. And so, in that, we didn't have same day shipping like we do today, the transportation, the technology, and there's this notion that more value meant more volume. So that meant
Mm.
adding water, which required other kinds of stabilizers, because if it didn't get to someone's doorstep for 3 years, which was not unheard of, that
Yeah.
they needed to have these other ingredients. And so we also identified that this was a space that needed to change, because
Mm.
now modern technology allows us to bring some of this ancient wisdom that has been lost. And there's a lot more data now today and
Mm.
clinical trials that, one, support that these ingredients are harmful. They are causing and having a negative impact on our bodies and the environment. And we have more data to support that these plants do, in fact, have medicinal um, reactions with our body that are incredibly favorable. And so it was a sort of that beautiful intersection. My mom is a self-taught computer programmer, website developer, and my sister herbalism. So the three of us could really come together to be this perfect trifecta of starting what was only gonna be the 3 of us in a family business that turned into quite a few of us running this company.
I love that, and thank you for sharing that. I think that it's beautiful, and you talked about quite a few things that I want to pull on there, and what I am really interested in is this interconnectedness that you've mentioned a couple of times, and I know that that also informs not just the way that you've built Green Goo from a scientific perspective, but in how you approach leadership. And what I really want to start with is your family culture, because you talked about your mom, your sister, and the interconnectedness between the three of you in building this business. And there's a phrase in the world of work that shows up almost in every company's culture deck, which is that we're a family here. And most employees have really learned to hear that as a warning sign in today's landscape. And it usually means long hours with no boundaries, loyalty that only flows one direction, and accountability that gets personal when things go wrong. This word family has been so thoroughly co opted by organizations that don't mean it that it's become almost meaningless in today's work landscape. But you, your mom, your sister, you built an actual family business, not metaphorically, but literally. Your mom, your sister, people who would come home with you essentially at the end of the day. And from what I've understood from our first call, you were deeply aware of the dangers of that from the very beginning. What did intentional family culture actually look like for you in building Green Goo? Not just the version that ends up in the employee handbook, but the real daily and sometimes uncomfortable work of building something that deserved to be called a family.
So much to peel back here. So, first I'll start from sort of my mom, sister, and I's infrastructure, which is we love and care and respect for each other so much. My sister and I are only a couple years apart. She graduated early from high school to come to college with me. We were college roommates. She lives one house down from me right now. We're best friends. And my
Mm,
mom has always been our best friend. And we grew up in the military. We moved around every 3 months to 3 years. And we quickly identified that our family, our core was our foundation. And there was a deep respect for that. And we sort of had this like interesting operating system as a family because of the military. We took on
mm,
certain roles in terms of how we packed the house up, how we moved the house, how we supported each other emotionally and operationally to actually execute the move, but also to be very aware of how to support each other as we each navigated each of those moves because some of them were easier than others for each of us. And so there
yeah,
was that sense of awareness. So I think there was some groundwork that was laid to set us up for that awareness as a business, as well as a deep respect and love for each other that we didn't want to lose. And so, with that being said, going into business, we heard and the data is there to support family businesses are typically incredibly dysfunctional,
mm,
and usually the outcome is not good, and relationships are broken, along with it breeds a culture of dysfunction within the organization. And then even your hiring becomes dysfunctional, right? So you've got this whole ecosystem. And
yeah,
for us, that was a lot of red flags. We thought, okay, we don't want to tarnish the relationship and we don't want to have that kind of ecosystem. So we sought help right from the beginning. We went to therapists, family coaches. We met with other people who had ran family businesses or were a part of a family business themselves and said, give us best practices. And so we distilled that down to a variety of different ways we were going to institute that from day one. And I think one for us that was very interesting that I think speaks to the interconnectedness that you speak about is that purpose is so important. And zone of genius very much allows that purpose to flourish. And people
mm,
where there's that alignment, where there is that purpose, then becomes a place of safety and trust. And so one of the
yes,
pieces of advice was figure out each other's zone of genius and start
mm,
that now and get everyone in that seat. And then the obvious is you respect that job description. You don't get to play the family card. That is their lane, the same way you would treat another employee. And you don't get to have that concession of, oh, well, I'm going to go ahead and override this because I can, or challenge
mm,
them in a way that would go outside of a traditional business operating system. And that seems obvious. But in practice, you'd be very surprised when you have
right,
that like knee jerk reaction because your family can hit a nerve to you in a way that someone else doesn't or knows how
absolutely,
to trigger you or
right,
or or even your own perception can be distorted as a result of knowing more about this other individual that could lend you to think that you could play that family card. So
right,
just that simple practice helped create some boundaries. And then because everyone was held to the same standard and our team saw and witnessed and practiced, didn't just, it wasn't just in the handbook, as you would say,
mm,
it was it was instituted on the day to day, it created that sense of trust. And that allowed everyone to get what I would call the positive side of that family ecosystem but without all the toxicity. And I'll even distill it down further. We had the personal operating system, the family operating system, and then the business operating system. And we actually mapped that out. And what was interesting is that each of the benchmarks in the system were essentially the same. They just came from a different layer of how we were on the day to day. So for example, like, we had our daily check-ins with our team. Well, we did the same thing where it was like, "What's your personal daily check-in? What's your family check in, and then what is your team member check in? And then we
Hmm.
had sort of a weekly one, a quarterly, a monthly one, a quarterly one. And some of that was also, you know, what are you doing to personally set yourself up for um, a positive mindset and purpose for your personal life? And that
Hmm.
might be going on a retreat or going on a vacation. And the same would be, okay, family. Are we having our quarterly check in where we spend some time with each other to see what is it that we may need to revisit in this container? And then the quarterly check in from a business perspective. And having some of those systems in place where you start at your core, the individual, and then you work your way to out to the family tier and then to the business, and they were synonymous with each other, really
Hmm.
worked well for us.
There's so much I love about everything that you just shared, and truly that the most the most I think critical piece to all of that is that that level of intentionality is rare, to say the least. And I've seen this across different organizations. Most of them wait for the dysfunction to become visible before they address it. You decided to work on the relationship way before it needed repair, and truly, even before your business grew to the scale that it is. And I think that intentionality is the kind of intentionality that we need to see from leaders today, even those that are not truly a family in the literal sense, because the payoff and the long term implications of it are so significant. But you just rarely ever see it. What did that teach you about the difference between leaders who talk about culture and leaders who actually build it? And what do you think most family businesses or even any organization that calls itself a family are missing by not doing the hard work first?
I think you nailed the value of doing this ahead of having to be reactive. So therefore, we got to respond in the moment instead of reacting to a negative situation that you can't erase. Because trust me, there are plenty of those moments where you're like, thank goodness I have this tool in my toolbox because we just diverted a tornado that could have gone sideways very quickly. And so what you're missing is the ability to re- repurpose that energy into something that is more productive instead of spending time with a cleanup job. And when you're building a business and you want to build it effectively and productively, that's a lot of wasted energy and
Yeah.
distraction from the business, let alone compromising relationships that matter. And so I highly, highly encourage this. And I can say, in our experience, as a result of this, I feel like our family is actually closer today instead of further apart. And we'll talk
Yeah.
more about some of these challenges that we were faced with, but most families would not have been able to weather what we eventually and had no idea we were going to face. And thank goodness we had created that solid foundation
Yes.
because without it, I mean, it would have been devastating.
Well, I think that's one of the more profound things that I think you just talked about there is the you it's not just about the intentionality, but it's also about the systems that you put in place to serve as the foundation for having or for operating in an aligned way. And in today's world, the word alignment has been so weaponized by organizations to kind of be this one way, one dimensional thing of do you know the vision and do you understand how you need to align with it and do what you need to do to play your part in it? And when I talk about alignment, I talk about it as a three-dimensional thing. And the way that you just presented it is you guys talk about getting aligned on the individual level and then the family level and the business level. And I think the multidimensionality of that paired with the systems that you put in place are exactly what allowed you to build the way that you have been able to build. And I think that is so powerful because we talk about work life balance, right? And in today's world, work life balance is this idea of I'm a different person at work than I am in my personal life. But what your family has done is effectively integrate your whole self into the work that you're doing. And I think that's a really important takeaway for our listeners is you have to shift and reframe the way that you're looking at work in a way that allows you to integrate your life the same way that you just explained.
Yeah, and it was so interesting now in reflection and hearing sort of you mirror this back to me. I can think of moments where we were going through the hiring process where it was very clear the individuals who were aligned with this way of operating and thrived in this space,
Hmm.
and where there were the few that this wasn't for them. And that doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong with them, because culture can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people.
Yeah.
And so we were very transparent with that, even in that hiring process, so that they could find their zones of genius and feel like they could come into an ecosystem where they could truly thrive. Because
Hmm.
oftentimes that tension that you see in the workplace is less about like personality conflicts and more like starting at the core of, is that
Yes.
person really able to be seen and execute in the way that they feel that they're, like, their most authentic self.
What you just talked about really maps to purpose, right? And you've shared this a few times now in our intro call and through this conversation so far of everything that you've done so far has always come back down to your purpose and really the organic nature behind the way that you approach not just again the science behind your business but in how you are leading. And purpose is something that I always talk about as, and not just me, obviously this is commonly understood as the North Star, but in my work, I talk about it as the North Star in terms of your alignment. It's not just something that you hang on a wall or write on a wall or put on your website. It's the thing that truly orients every decision, every hire, every trade off, just as you shared. And when that purpose is genuinely embedded in a leader's identity, then it stops being a value and becomes more of a filter. It changes the way that, or it changes what you're willing to do and what you refuse to do. Maslow would put this at the top of his pyramid where he placed self actualization or the fullest expression of who you are. And in the workplace, I translate that as fulfillment. But what I find most interesting about your story is that your purpose isn't abstract, it's botanical, it's literal. The mission is in the product, in the certification, in the soil. As a certified permaculturist, you talked about using natural systems as a lens for how you think about organizations. I want to push on that specifically because nature inspired can truly mean anything. But what does thinking biologically actually change about how you have led, how you continue to lead, how you structure your team, and how you make decisions, especially under pressure?
Oh, I love so much of that. So, our mission on paper is spread goodness. That
Mm,
is our
mm,
mission. And that is not just spreading good products and healthy ingredients on your body, but it is spreading goodness. How do you treat your team member? How do you treat a stranger? How are we going to make a business decision? Who are we going to partner with? And that has really helped us, especially in crisis. When the pandemic happened and we were 98% retail, right? You have poison ivy, you go to your local pharmacy. All of a sudden, no one is going to stores.
mm.
And all of a sudden, we are dismantled from our office. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to fire my entire team. How are we going to do this? And watching this team scramble as quickly as possible to build an online business. And then we just happened to have sanitizer in our portfolio. And then they immediately saw in that the first responders and health practitioners were having a difficult time getting their sanitizer. And they built a system overnight to donate like thousands and thousands and thousands of units to these people. And I was like, what a beautiful way to build our online business so that, yes, we can keep this business alive and then pay it forward with what is in high demand without capitalizing off of it. And this beautiful balance. And I was like, you guys, and how did you do this when we were doing our debrief? Well, our mission is spread goodness. It was easy. It was clear. Every time we had a roadblock, we just knew what we needed to do. And it was so simple. And yet we were dealing with what was one of our biggest business crises at the time.
Mm,
And our vision is bringing forward time honored traditions. Now, what does
mm,
that mean operationally? That means that we still make the ingredients the same way we did in our kitchen when we started in Idaho. We were growing the herbs, drying them on old screen doors, and then infusing them in our kitchen. And I mean, we were so busy that we had to take our camping equipment and build an outdoor kitchen so that we could
wow.
cook our food outside because our kitchen was so busy. But when we went to scale, we preserved that process. We found a
Mm,
manufacturer who we didn't fit the traditional SOP and helped us build a dedicated line with a dedicated team with a dedicated process. And when we started getting into places like Walgreens, Rite Aid, Walmart, and there was a very consistent thread of compromise your process because that's the only way you're going to scale. There was our team was like, "That's a hard no." We're
mm,
gonna protect that process. But what it also means in practice is, like, why I'm here with you today, which is storytelling and
mm.
bringing wisdom forward and spending time with your community and being intentional around that time, because that's something that gets lost in this strong modern tech world that we live
Yeah,
in, and it's
absolutely.
bringing forward that time-honored tradition. So, just to kinda unpack that is I kind of think it comes back to that integrated system, and it's not just something you put on the wall, it's a living, breathing organism just like your business, just like these plants, and I just love how the plants are just woven into this whole
Yeah,
full circle piece, and I'll even add to it for me, like, one of my greatest joys in this full circle moment is also how plants really do ground humans. And part of that psychoneuroimmunology is bringing those plants in and dropping that cortisol and dropping that inflammation, and so, I get to live it and breathe it and authentically be a part of it, and so I'm in my zone of genius and so passionate
yeah.
about my purpose, and it's so fun.
Well, this was the kind of perspective angle connection that really drew me to wanting to have this conversation with you. Is just this organicness behind the whole thing, because I think it speaks so much to, what I preach about purpose of it having to be organic and innate and something that you not just live and breathe, but is truly growing in you. But there's something that I think is explicitly or important for us to explicitly, excuse me, point out for our listeners, because I see organizations struggle with this a lot when it comes to using their purpose, their mission to filter when it comes to decision making. And so I want to talk about this explicitly. There's a version of purpose that's easy to hold when things are going well. Revenue's up, team's intact, the mission feels sustainable. The real test of whether that purpose is embedded in your identity, whether it's your personal identity or the organization's identity, rather than just aspiration, is what happens when the environment turns against you. You mentioned that the pandemic was that test for you, and retail dropped essentially overnight. That next decision potentially would have been layoffs. You made a different call. Walk me through what that decision making process actually looked like, and how having a clearly embedded purpose made it possible for you to make a choice that the numbers alone wouldn't have supported.
Oh, and, and I will also add that if your mission doesn't hold up under a stress test, it might also be you have the wrong mission.
Mm,
May not be embedded in the group, but the inversion of that may also be true.
yeah.
And for us, um, our team was so gelled and the mission was so clear And the trust was so strong, and I think trust is so important, right? Because when everyone's kinda in that state of fight or flight, trust becomes a big question mark. And I think that is the value that you can get from having purpose and alignment
Mm,
so deeply rooted is really the output is trust. So
yeah.
then you can hold space for each of the individuals, one, to fail because we're humans and we're going to, or have hard moments because we're not just dealing with, in this particular case, a pandemic. We're dealing with personal crises, people's family members getting sick or, fragmented in isolation. And there's a lot more going on. And so by continuing that level of purpose and alignment, it allowed us to shift in a very different way and still maintain our core values and be successful. And we weren't going to compromise our process, not even then. The team's trust was so rooted in all of this that if we failed, our team was going to go, you know what? We failed successfully. We did
Mm,
everything we could to get through this, and we are just where we are. Instead of that fear in that process of what does it mean to build a company? And I was very transparent with people. Like, if you need to jump ship because the unknown is too much, we support you. We'll set you
mm,
up with your severance. You can move to your next job, start looking elsewhere. Um, and I even did that fast forward when we were dealing with the buyback and the selling because they also have to calibrate what's good for them, but
yeah.
at least they knew that trust was there, and that was important.
Let's talk a little bit about the selling, because at one point, you shared with me that you had to make that decision as part of your pivot. And there's before I got you to tell the story, there's a question that I want to ask every founder who has ever sold their company, and almost nobody asks it directly. Do you know what you're actually selling? Because on paper, you're selling equity, revenue, market position, distribution, but underneath all of that, you're also selling the culture that you spent years building, the norms, the relationships, the unwritten rules, and the trust that make the organization what it is. And most of the time, that part doesn't survive the transaction. So tell us a little bit about the sell, if you're okay with it. And then when you made the decision to sell, what did you understand or come to understand about what you were putting on the table beyond the business itself? And what happened to the people and the culture when ownership changed hands?
So, originally, our plan was not to sell. So, we get out of the pandemic, and we just barely made it, and I saw a number of businesses fail, and especially friends, dear businesses, and the organizations who weathered it well were obviously big companies, and especially in the OTC space. They're very insulated, and we're competing against the big guys. So it was clear that we could not handle another pandemic or some catastrophic event, and we needed to get on solid ground. So the idea was that we were going to find an investment partner. And in that journey, a lot of people just got ruled out because maybe they were a chemical company, a traditional OTC brand looking for a natural bolt on, and there wasn't alignment. It, that's great that they wanted to introduce natural to their portfolio, but then we would be working with a group that has built things that we just didn't want to stand by.
One, yeah.
And so a lot of our crossing off the list was a result of staying true to our roots. And then we met an organization that was building a portfolio. And so they were, from a consumer packaged goods standpoint, they were new. However, they really believed in plant based and they had an international footprint. We were starting to get requests for countries all over the world, and they were well funded. Their founder had an investment banking firm that allowed him to have access to capital. So on paper, it's kind of a dream. So we get folded into the portfolio. We're not going anywhere, and we get to maintain the culture, the team, everything. So it's like, "Oh my gosh, could you have anything better?"
Yeah.
Except, um, a handful of weeks into the partnership, the, investment banking firm was raided by the feds, faced significant financial and legal issues, and essentially it tarnished the portfolio's reputation and severed its financial capabilities. And
Mm,
I was faced with the one thing that I had been hoping to avoid, which was I had less than 24 hours to terminate my entire team, including my
mm,
mom and sister, my husband, my brother in law, my sister and brother in law had just adopted their second baby. Employee number one, best friend who had moved from another career to come work for us. It was devastating, beyond devastating, because here we had worked so hard to avoid this very moment. And it wasn't because we go back to family. It wasn't just like okay, bye everybody. See you later. We were devastated for them. They were devastated for us. And so it's probably one of those non-conventional terminations in terms of just spending time with each of them and just crying and
mm,
mourning and helping them try to find where their next job was going to be and getting letters of references as quickly as possible and looking at our network to see who we could help and how we could help um, find them a new home. And some people were like, "I'm not leaving." So it
mm.
was great. The next morning, it was so cool. The next morning after the layoffs, almost everybody showed up for the morning meeting, and none of them worked for us anymore, and they're like, "How can we help? What can we do?" And, of course,
Mm,
in that moment, I'm like, "I don't even know how to ask for help. I don't even know what to do." In my mind, I still had a job. I hadn't even really processed that I myself didn't have a job.
yeah.
And for me, that sense of purpose, I know it was difficult for them too, so I wasn't alone. That loss, that sudden loss of sense of purpose was like I lost a loved one. I had such paralysis. I was anxious about the future. How are we gonna pay our bills? How do we, unwind this? What do we do? And then ruminating on the past.
Mm,
Shoulda, woulda, coulda, what could I have done differently? And, I understood what that hardship was for the first time. Like, when you're building a business, there's so many hard days, and you definitely have those days where, especially as a CEO, you feel alone and how you're gonna get over this mountain. But this is one that I never thought I would feel, and
mm.
it is all those feelings.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the fact that people showed up the next day and still wanted to be a part of figuring out the next step forward speaks so much to the culture that you built and essentially the payoff of the intentionality behind it. And I think there's so much to say about that because, as you know, as any of our listeners know, in today's market with the layoffs, most of what people get is an email at 6 a.m. to let them know that their role has been terminated and nothing else comes after that. But the continuity that came after you had to make that decision, I think, speaks so much to what you built and the reward of the intentionality that guided every decision. What did that experience, though, teach you about the relationship between ownership, culture, and the people who actually hold an organization together?
Well, the entire time, and I always practiced this, but I truly felt it in that moment because it wasn't how I built it, it was how we built it.
Mm,
And it was always we, because without the we, there's just me, myself, and I, and what is that? And it really stared me in the face. Like I got to see that reflection of what that means for a we built this and how much they also cared so much about the organization.
mm,
And I only wish that more organizations, I couldn't imagine sending an email and what that must feel like. Um and I'm grateful that I didn't have to have that experience. As much as terminating all of them was horrible, I would much rather have had that moment where we got to be authentic with each other
Mm.
than not.
This is, for me, this is the part of your story that I think speaks most directly to what this season has been about, because engagement, real engagement, not compliance, not performance, requires a connection to something that matters. And I think most people, if they were faced with what you were faced with, would have walked away. The rational decision would have been to close the chapter and start something new, but something kept you engaged. Something kept you connected to the work, to the mission, to the possibility of getting it back. And I don't think that that's a personality trait. I think that it's an alignment story. What was it that kept you engaged in the work through the sale, through the loss, through everything that came after? And what does that experience tell you about the difference between engagement that's tied to circumstances versus engagement that's rooted in something deeper?
It started at the kitchen table, and there's a handful of micro moments that sort of build upon the sort of energy and momentum that allowed us to get across the finish line. But we're sitting at the kitchen table right after all the terminations, and we're with my mom and sister and I, and we're just sort of grieving. And I pulled out my lip balm and I recognized my lip balm's about to be gone. I said to my mom and sister, because production had stopped, like, "How much lip balm do you have?" And they're like, "We don't have any." And I thought, "Oh my gosh, we gotta stock up." And then it was, "How much repair do you have? Where's the face wash? What are we looking like on inventory?" Because we personally can't live without it. And then we started getting emails of, "When is this gonna be in stock? My son is a paraplegic. This is the only thing that works. My daughter has eczema. This is the only thing that works." And we're getting this influx of emails, and I was like, we have to buy it back, but we don't have anything. We lost everything in the transaction. Like, we didn't get anything in the transaction, and we lost our business." And it just felt like a not possible moment. And, I had been working with this coach, and it was very early in our relationship, and I thought, "Oh, I need to text Timmy and tell him I can't pay him, so I'm not gonna show up on Monday for our meeting." And so I text him, and he's like, "What happened?" And it was a brief exchange, and then I said, "Well," he's like, "I'll be there Monday at 5 o'clock. I'll be there every Monday at 5 o'clock until you don't need me anymore." And honestly, in that moment, it didn't feel like a favor, it kinda felt like a burden, but I was just in the middle of it, right? Like, I just
Mm.
wanted someone to tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And so I struggled with going to that meeting on Monday, but then I was overwhelmed with guilt, and I thought, "What a nice person. I need to at least say thank you, but no thank you." And we get on the phone, and he just jumps right to it, like, "Jodi, what are you gonna do?" And I was like, "I don't know. I need someone to tell me what to do." And
Mm.
I was like, "I think we're gonna buy back the company, but I don't know, like, how are we gonna do that?" And he's like, "Jodi, you know what to do. No one needs to tell you what to do. You know what to do.
Mm.
I just need to get you mentally fit enough so you can find it." Because my purpose was lost. And that's like the undertone right there. So he goes, every 3 hours, I'm gonna have you set your alarm, and every 3 hours, I'm gonna have you do a presence exercise. Now, mind you, I thought I still had a job. I'm like, how am I gonna stop what I'm doing every 3 hours? That's crazy. And I'm like, "And what's a presence exercise?" And he's like, "You're gonna focus on one of your 5 senses for 30 seconds to 2 minutes, and you're gonna do that every 3 hours. And eventually, Jodi, you're gonna get the clarity and the wisdom to figure out what to do."
Mm.
And so the first time I did it was so great. I set the alarm, and alarm goes off. I take off my shoes. I go outside. My husband's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Timmy
Yeah.
says to do a presence exercise." And he's like, "What is that?" And slowly but surely, and it wasn't easy at first, right? Like, he's like, "Focus on the clouds." And I'm like, all I can think about is like, my world is exploding.
Mm.
um, but I did that. Wow. I had employees that I would go on walks with, and they would cheer me along, like, "Jodi, you got this."
Mm.
While I'm doing this coaching with Timmy and my sensory rebuild, and I'd say like 4 or 5 weeks into it, it was like all of a sudden I started having ideas. And I said to him, I go, "Timmy, I got an idea." He's like, "Of course you do. There you go." And it was I was finding my purpose again while I'm getting these emails from customers saying like, "This is what I need." And I'm like, all of a sudden, the builder in me started to find my purpose again and that commitment to that purpose, and then started knocking on doors and saying, "I need some creative financing. I need some help. What can I do here?" And there was multiple team members that stood by me even while they have other jobs to
Mm.
say, "Okay, what can I do in these random hours to support you if you need this, if you need that?" And of course, I was really cognizant of not asking for anything and unless it was like absolutely necessary, but I also recognized their need to want to help and to
Yeah.
to be okay with that in a way that affirmed their offering and their gift to help move this thing forward. And it took us 18 months,
Mm.
but then eventually we got it across the finish line.
I love that. And I think what you just talked about is so central to people as being really the a critical piece of your ability to move and navigate situations like this. One of the things I talk about in my framework is there are two anchors that we have to have. And one of those is purpose. That's what's pulling us towards a direction. And the other is people, which is essentially what it serves as our feedback loop. And when we think about people, we often think about it as, do we have the right support system? Do we have the right people in our corner? But it really goes beyond that. It's also about the feedback loop and people not just giving you the encouragement, but giving you the feedback, giving you a mirror to be able to look back at yourself, but also giving you the resources to understand how to move appropriately in situations like this. And so much of what you just said, I think, speaks to the importance of having the right people serving as your anchor through life essentially, but really through the decisions like this that have such significant implications for yourself and your own growth, but also in your long-term trajectory. So
And I need to highlight because I didn't emphasize in that share, and this is probably more critical than any of the other components, was family.
yeah.
Had our family not invested in the way that we did when we started this company, in that moment, there could have been fingers pointing, the blame game. I mean, all of our, like, how are we going to pay our mortgage we were faced with and
Mm,
raise our children and pay for the garbage. I mean, my daughter was like, "Mom, why is there garbage still at the front door?" "Well, sweetie, we had to skip it this week because 'cause we're getting real creative." But having that family support
mm,
and being able to hold each other because some days we just needed to grieve
yeah.
and be held. And thank goodness it almost seemed like and this was just a happy accident that when one of us was having a hard day, someone else was having a strong day, so we could hold each other and raise each other up to shift through the next thing that we needed to accomplish, and then pooling resources and being like, "Okay, how can we jigsaw this thing a little bit to release some tension here?" And okay, I can do this, you can do this as we kinda, like, stitch it slowly back together.
Mm,
And it was just it's one of the most difficult times in my life, but it's also one of the most fruitful.
yeah.
And so I get the gift of having a deeper sense of gratitude going forward and a deeper sense of appreciation because, even though we had a really great family business personal operating system, I also know I can do better,
Mm,
especially on the personal journey that I went through in terms of getting more present and instituting that into my ecosystem. Because, yes, we were very much supporting each other and putting in good infrastructure, but today I know I can even do better by allowing everyone to be more in the present and investing in themselves so that they can show up the best version of themselves and be that much more committed to the purpose that they've committed to, the choice that they have decided in terms of being in that ecosystem.
mm,
And so I'm really grateful for even this next season of how we're going to build.
yeah. I love that. And I have to point this out. And I don't know if you've done or you've had this realization in the work that you've done, but I love that the kitchen plays such a central role in this whole process and this whole journey for you because obviously when we talk about the kitchen, it's a place where family gathers. It's also the place where we get nourishment, where we feed ourselves and take in the nutrition. And I think it's so central to everything you've shared. I mean, you started the business in your kitchen. You talked about, in that 24-hour period, you all were sitting in your kitchen after having to make that decision. And it's so beautiful the way that this has all come back to really what the kitchen symbolizes. So I have to point that out because I think it's such a powerful image symbol that is so central to everything that you've shared on this episode.
There's so much richness in that. Thank you. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you highlighting that. I'm just gonna, like, soak that up.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. Well, okay, Jody, there's something that I believe in deeply, and it runs through everything that I do with my methodology, my framework, which is that a leader's internal state isn't private. It reproduces itself in the organization. A leader who is aligned, engaged, and fulfilled creates the conditions for alignment, engagement, and fulfillment in the people around them. A leader who's burnt out, who is disconnected or operating from fear, regardless of how well they hide it, produces that same environment downstream. That's not a soft claim, it's organizational physics. How did you see that play out in your own experience? The connection between your internal state as a leader and what was happening in the culture around you. And what does that mean for how you think about leadership development and the responsibility that leaders have to their own well being?
So in the early days, I really truly believed that investing in my personal development, mindset, presence was a luxury. I thought that in doing that would distract from the execution and the tactical work that I needed to do in the checklist on a day-to-day basis. And that only serves you and your system and your team to a point because you're 100% correct. When you're operating from a state of fight or flight and a state of reactiveness and this state of like defining resilience as you just keep pushing forward, then it is exactly physics. That energy ripples and compounds because then your team members show up in a state of fight or flight. And
Mm,
then they are also reactive. And then you know what else happens? They go home. And that's the experience that they bring home. And I feel a
yeah.
deep sense of responsibility to, I want to be the positive ripple effect that happens at the dinner table so that we can raise like have families and ecosystems that are strong and healthy and raise families in that environment.
Mm,
Because and you've seen it, it's like the old TV show, right? Parents have a hard day at work, what happens at home? And I would challenge that you're probably only operating at about 20% of the capacity that you are able to because the energy that you are putting into that fight or flight is energy that can then be converted into more productive energy. And that's what
yeah.
leads to burnout. Like burnout is your body is exhausted and your mind is racing. And I'll even go back to psychoneuroimmunology. Cortisol goes up, inflammation goes up. All of a sudden, it's foggy brain, it's insomnia. It shows up in chronic skin conditions, chronic pain. And so, the value of investing in yourself, investing in that presence, building your mental fitness and your mindset the same way you build and you go to the gym and build that physical muscle, it is going to have a halo effect on everyone around you. And that 18 months was very difficult for me in terms of, are we gonna get this done? What happens if we don't? I had to completely stay out of that mindset.
Mm,
And it was almost like the most like personal development investment time of my life and staying incredibly present and aware of the possibilities because that's where creativity comes from.
yeah.
There's that Rick Rubin quote that it's not like what you produce, it's staying in a state so that you can like the flow
Mm,
and the creativity comes through you.
yeah.
And that's where companies thrive. And you can see it even like when someone's in the Olympics and they're in that like state of flow. It's like you can access so much more of your mind body capabilities. And so I'll share this story. My daughter had an exam, and this is the halo effect that can happen even at home. And I picked her up from school and I'm like, how'd it go? And she's like, oh my gosh, mom, my teacher asked me like after my exam, he needed to talk to me. And I just like eyes wide open. She's like, I know. I thought I was in so much trouble. And he goes, I really want to compliment you on how you took your test. And she was like, huh? And he goes, you rubbed your fingertips together. You took a couple deep breaths and you got present. Or he didn't say you got present. He goes, you got in the moment. And he goes, and then I noticed you worked through the problems you did know. Then you stopped. And this is when he said, then you took a couple more deep breaths and then you got present. And then you leveraged what you did know to help you with the problems you didn't know. And you did an excellent job on this exam. There were some very difficult questions in there on purpose. And she goes, Mom, it was like I was talking to you. And like, don't you want that in your like your work system where it's like you can get your team members super present to address a problem
Yeah.
and go, okay, what resources do I have to get this done? What do I know? What do I not know? How do I do that? And like the joy you get from like cracking that code and like the results, and then the team gets to celebrate that. I mean, it's so good. So good.
So good. I love that. Jodi, I'm in such awe of your journey and truly the place that you have built this whole business, this whole life, this whole mindset around. And I think there's so much that our listeners can take away from this short but powerful conversation that we've had today. And so I want to say thank you for sharing your story, first of all, and really taking us through the insights and the lessons that you've learned through all of it. There is a leader that is likely listening to this right now who is somewhere in the middle of their own version of your story. Maybe they're watching the culture that they've built start to erode under pressure. Maybe they're being asked to make a decision that would compromise the very thing that they've built. Or maybe they're already lost. Maybe they've already lost something and they're trying to figure out whether to fight for it or walk away. What do you want them to hear?
I think it's set that alarm every 3 hours. Get present, and you will find the answers. You will find your purpose. You will find your way to your North Star.
Hmm, I love that. Well, Jodi, there was a thought that kept coming back to me as we talked, which is that culture isn't what you say you value, it's what you're willing to protect. You built something real. You lost it, you fought to get it back, and you did it all from a place of purpose that was so embedded in who you are that no transaction, no raid, no 24-hour crisis could separate you from it. That's not resilience as a buzzword, that's alignment at its deepest level. If our listeners want to connect with you or learn more about Green Goo, what's the best way to find you?
Greengoo.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn at Jodi A. Scott. And I would love to hear from you.
Well, Jodi, this has been incredible. This has been a pleasure to speak with you and learn from your story. I am so grateful for you today.
Thank you.
To our listeners, the question Jodi's story asks of all of us is the same one that the More Method is built on. Do you know what your purpose is, not as a statement, but as a filter? And do you know what you're willing to do to protect it? If not, if this is something that you're struggling with, take the alignment assessment if you haven't. The link is in the show notes. It's the place to start to really understand what that North Star is that is pulling you in your direction. I'm your host, Clarence Moore. This is Align, Engage, Fulfilled, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for being here.